Welcome to Trip the Beltway Fantastic. According to the UN this week, some 1,054 civilians have been killed trying to get food in Gaza since May. Some 767 or 66 of them so far were killed at food distribution points operated by the Global Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, which is backed by the US and Israel and uses private military contractors for security. American private military contractors. Last month, those contractors made headlines when an Associated Press investigation reported that the contractors had been witnessed using live ammunition and pepper spray in crowd control and might have been responsible for shooting civilians. This was vehemently denied by the GHF and the American contracting companies Safe Reach Solutions and UG Solutions. But the reality is that armed American mercenaries are working alongside Israeli military in a combat zone and in a situation in which scores of civilians desperate for food are being shot at with guns, tanks, pepper spray, and tear gas. So, whatever gave the US government the idea that sending US contractors to do this kind of work would be a good thing? Well, hired guns had been integral in US policies in Iraq and Afghanistan during the global war on terror and have worked with governments across the globe on humanitarian and rescue missions, even humanitarian work. This feels a bit different. Biden and Trump had vowed to keep US military boots off the ground in the Middle East, particularly in Israel, Gaza. So, is this a way to keep that pledge while assisting Israel directly in its military aims? Does that still make us co-belligerents? What happens if these contractors get hurt or killed while they are there? And what if they kill Palestinians? What happens then? Here to talk about all of this and more this week is Morgan Lorette, a former Blackwater contractor who worked for the company during its infamous time in Iraq from 2004 and 2005, and later went back to Iraq as a commissioned Army intelligence officer. Lorette has since written a critical memoir called Guns, Girls, and Greed. I was a Blackwater mercenary in Iraq. Thank you, Morgan, for joining me today on Trip the Beltway. Fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a fascinating time in the private military contracting world. So happy to kind of dig into it with you.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate it. And I appreciate you being open to talking about these issues because, responsible statecraft, my reporter, Stavrula Paps, had actually tapped you for a couple stories to get some texture and context for what is happening there with these contractors. In one of those pieces, you said using PMCs has become a way for politicians to put US citizens in harm's way while avoiding boots on the ground. PMCs are being used as proxy armies so the American public doesn't protest getting into the next forever war. A contractor being killed or injured overseas doesn't get the same media attention as a service member. Those are really, excellent, insights into what we're going to be talking about. What was your first impression when you heard back in April that American contractors were going to be sent over to Gaza to start manning checkpoints?
Yeah, I'm still kind of in that realm. So there was a number of people that reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to go do this gig?" And I was like, "Absolutely not." And here's the thing: at least when I was a contractor for Blackwater, I could see that I had some protections. I worked under a State Department contract, under Blackwater, 1099 contractor under them. So in theory, if something happened, I still had the United States government that would at least say, yeah, he's one of our guys. Now Gaza is a completely different story because when UG Solutions got this contract, I don't think there was any U.S. funding for it. And it even goes all the way back to, that dock that President Biden created that turned out to be an abysmal failure. Like there was no
Oh,
U.S.
yeah.
backing. And I thought, what are the legalities of this? And I got a couple of buddies that have taken these contracts, and I keep telling them, here's the concern: is that if something happens, what jurisdiction are you under? And that's a question that I don't think anybody wants to answer or anybody can answer. Are you under Palestinian? Are you under Israeli? Are you under the US? Are you under, anything? And the truth is that if something does happen to a contractor, or a contractor does something, nobody knows who's going to fill that legal void. And that is a huge liability as the person on the ground. So I just refuse. I wouldn't do it. There's no way.
Yeah, I like that you emphasize that, and I'm I'm actually pretty surprised that reporters haven't probed that question more when it comes to the Gaza situation. Is it is though the media has just accepted that these Americans are over there. We don't know, as you say, the jurisdiction under which they operate. We don't know what kind of licensing or permits or waivers they got to go over there. From what I understand, if they're bringing their own guns, they have to get um, approvals from the US State Department. I haven't gotten any answers from the State Department on whether those approvals had been issued and when, or I mean, and you'd be able to answer this. Would there be a situation in which they went over there and were supplied weapons so as to avoid any of these controls on the domestic end? It does seem like a big black hole of information.
Yeah, I almost guarantee that they're being supplied weapons over there. And here's the
Okay.
other concern: as a boots on the ground type of guy, I wouldn't go to a contract where they told me to bring my own weapon. What that tells me is like, holy cow, this is Bush League. This is going all the way back to like Iraq in '03, where they had Custer's battles and all those fly by night PMCs. So I guarantee that they're being issued weapons. What they're not being issued is support. They're not being issued heavy
Hmm.
weapons, right? So they're getting everything up to like a 240 Bravo, which is, a larger weapon. But they're not getting anything larger than that. And there's no helicopter support. When the contract first started, there was a ceasefire between Hamas and the Israelis, and they were told essentially, you guys are out there on your own. Israel can't come to your aid because that would break the ceasefire rules. And I know that it's evolved past that, where now Israel is going and they're securing these sites, kind of setting an outer perimeter. And then UG Solutions and Safe Re Solutions are moving the food into those specific locations where the Gazas can pick it up. But it's still, Israel's still probably not going to want to come and support something when something bad happens, because how does that look on them? And it really is putting these individuals in a situation where they have to make snap judgment decisions on what to do and what they can't do, and then not understanding if there's any legal ramifications for that. No rules
Right.
of engagement. Like, look, it was crazy when I got in Blackwater in 2004. It's absolutely insane. This is like a whole another level of crazy. And the interesting part, I think, is that at least with Blackwater, I could sit there and say I wasn't a mercenary. Granted, I put it on the cover of my book because I still feel like I was a mercenary, but I was under a U.S. contract. These guys are not under a U.S. contract. They are like, yeah, they might get some funding from the U.S., but it's primarily Israel, UAE, and Egypt, is what I've been told. So
Hmm.
now you actually have U.S. forces moving into a combat zone, and they're making money off of it. Now, if that doesn't meet the actual UN definition of mercenary, I don't know what does.
Yeah, I mean, you're pointing out some real issues here, and it seems like a giant shell game to me. So just to clarify for the audience, so the contractors were sent over there in April to man these checkpoints, as you point out, during a ceasefire. I think that they were working for a quote unquote consortium at the time, which later became GHF. And now they're working for GHF to man or create a secure perimeter around these food distribution sites. So they're not working directly for the Israeli government. But what is the chain of command? Is the chain of ultimately, is it the IDF? As you're pointing out, we don't know. And I think that, and the United States government just gave GHF $30 million out of the USAID budget to support this food distribution. The GHF is very shadowy. It was a conception of the Israeli government, but the administrators are in the private world. I believe some tech connoisseurs, some former Israeli defense officials, a former CIA operative by the name of Riley. I think it's James Riley or Stephen Riley. And then they've contracted out with these companies here in the United States who also are run by former military. So it is very shadowy. But as you point out, we don't know what the chain of command is. Can you tell me a little bit about what kind of people go to work for these security companies, knowing they'll be shipped overseas? I mean, what's the lure of saying, "Oh, I'm going to go to Gaza and man a checkpoint"? Is it the money? Is it the adventure? Um, what's got to be going through their heads to accept
Yeah,
such a job?
I say that the people that went to go work for Blackwater probably didn't make the best life decisions before working for Blackwater. And Blackwater is probably not the best life decision that you can make. And it's people like me. It's people that, you want the adventure, kind of an adrenaline junkie, but the money is the primary draw. So initially, I think it was when they were doing the checkpoint, it was $1,100 a day. And then you got $200 a day in per diem. I think it's 178, but let's round up. And then when they started doing the mobile operations, then now it's $1,500 a day with the $200 a day in per diem. Now, per diem tells me that they're staying in Israel. But they're staying in hotels in Israel, and that's how they're getting paid their per diem. They're getting the food. They submit receipts like any corporate job. Um, but the people that are doing this, they are former special operations guys, a lot of them. Now, crazy enough, there's some Blackwater guys that I worked with that are over there. 20 years later, they're still in the game. But for the most part, there's a lot of guys that joined the US military let's say late 2010, 2011. They go in the special forces, the Army Rangers, they get to do all that stuff. And then they didn't really get to go see their wars, right? Afghanistan was drawing down, Iraq was drawing down. So there's a sense of adventure that you want to do that, right? It's like being a plumber and you work your entire life to be a plumber, and then you go home and visit your mom and she says she's got a leaky sink, and they're like, don't worry, we'll call a plumber. Like, you want to be a plumber, you want to go over there, you want to be a gunslinger. So it's definitely those types of individuals. The people that have been doing this for 20 years, they really kind of fall into two buckets. But the primary bucket is the guys like me that made a bunch of money and then went and spent a bunch of money. And now this is their career. They keep going back overseas. They need the money. They have their mortgages. They have their, maybe their kids are in college. So it really is a mishmash of individuals over there. And some of them just shouldn't be there. Let's be honest here. Like, when you grow
Yeah.
exponentially and you say, I need 500 people, not every Navy SEAL is going to jump on that, or special forces guys, right? So they absolutely have people over there that probably shouldn't be on ground, but they don't get paid if that person isn't on ground. So of course they were shuttling them through. There's not a whole lot of training that goes into it. They were giving people 48 to 72 hours, saying, hey, if you want on this contract,
Wow.
we'll go get you to Israel. They get them in, they give them a quick briefing. There's your gun, there's your body armor. Let's rock and roll. So it's not like they do this big train up before. At least Blackwater had some kind of a train up. I think the interesting thing is that now what you're seeing is venture capital in the private military contractors. That's what this is. This is venture capital. These are
Yeah.
guys that are saying, I can get money. Let me go invest in the CIA guy, the special forces guy. We'll create a corporation around him. And then the venture capital people get the money. And you see the same thing with Fogbo. Remember, Fogbo was on the dock before UG Solutions even started doing the checkpoint stuff. So there's a lot of private military contractors where venture capitalists are saying, there's money in this. Let's support it. Go out and get some contracts. And they are just making money hand over fist.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I feel like the venture capitalism aspect of defense, military contracting is relatively new. If not new, it's in ascendance. You hear it everywhere with Silicon Valley and all of the AI and everything, all the money that's going into the military industrial complex. And think of it in regards to the private military contractors. Can you talk about that new dimension? Does that make it more dangerous, more shadowy, more suspect?
I mean, it definitely makes it more shadowy. Right. You have the GHF that contracts with UG Solutions, that has subcontract with Safe Reach. I mean, whatever that is, you're putting 4 or 5 different hands
Yeah.
or arms lengths in between the people on the ground and the people that are actually paying for it, right? So that makes it harder to track. And what we've seen in the PMC world is it also goes under different contracts, right? It could be an HHS contract, a DOS contract, or a Border Patrol contract. Like, it's hard to track all of these things in any kind of a linear sequence. And I think that that's part of why they do it. As a politician, I don't want to put boots on the ground. So I'm going to go send over guys like Morgan, and he's going to go do the job for me. And if Morgan dies, nobody's really going to feel that bad. Here's the one thing you didn't mention when you introduced this. 2 contractors have already been injured over there. Now, I'll bet you most of your listeners had no idea that 2 contractors have been, and that's why you do it. You do it because if a soldier got injured, you have to own up to your policy. But if a contractor gets injured, it's gonna be in the news for 24 hours, and then nobody's really gonna care. So yes, the venture capital definitely makes it more shadowy. It also allows you to scale. So when you think of venture capital in Silicon Valley, it's usually software as a service, or SaaS. I like the word SaaS.
Sassy.
Yeah. So and that allows you to take like a software and scale it really fast. That's what venture capital does. It allows you to create a company around 2 or 3 individuals. And then once you get a contract, you scale it. So when UG Solutions got this contract, let's just say they needed 1,000 people, they didn't have any of those guys hired until they got the contract. And then as soon as they got the contract, that's when they said, we need 1,000 people right now. So the good of it is that Walmart does this, right? Around Christmas season, you get contractors, you scale up because you need more checkout people. Is that really what we want to do in combat? And I don't, I mean, I don't have the moral high ground. I know I'm hypocritical here, but is that really what you want to do, is take something so morally ambiguous as law enforcement or military or security and be able to scale it up with a bunch of people that you don't know how they act or how they're going to operate or what the
Right.
legal jurisdiction is around it? And I don't think it's a good idea, to be honest with you.
And just going back to the licensing and the weapons, it just dawned on me that if you're correct and they're getting the weapons there, that reduces again the footprint of the American government on this, because then the State Department doesn't have to issue these waivers and permits or licenses or whatever you call it. And so this really becomes, at least from their perspective, a purely private contracting function. This isn't the United States aiding and assisting directly US Israeli military efforts on the ground. This is just the only thing that's tying them at this point that we know of is the $30 million that the USAID deemed fit to send over there, while they're they're canceling aid all over the globe, but they rushed this 30 million through, apparently, to the GHF for these aid distribution sites. But I take your point. Let's talk about the converse, though. When was it 4 contractors were killed in Iraq and hung off the bridge in Fallujah in 2004, the American government, the American military did have to respond because it was so visceral. These images of these Americans being hung from a bridge after they had been killed, beaten, dragged through the streets, or whatever. It was broadcast all over the world, and they felt they had to respond. And there were 2 major battles of the war in Iraq in Fallujah. Um, can you talk a little bit about how something going sideways with our contractors in Gaza could actually commit us, you at the U.S. government on the ground there?
Yeah, people ask me how World War III is going to start if Russia is going to send a nuke over to Ukraine, and I say absolutely not. That's not how it's going to go. What's going to happen is we're going to have private military contractors. We have them in Ukraine, we have them in Syria, we have them in Libya, we have them everywhere. We have them in Gaza, and something is going to happen to those contractors, and it's going to make a big enough noise to where the
Mm,
media picks it up. And to your point, this is what happened in 2004, right? George W. Bush did not want to be seen as Bill Clinton with Somalia, where U.S. soldiers were dragged through the streets. In this case, it wasn't soldiers, it was civilians. But George W. Bush said, you guys need to go take Fallujah at this point. So the Marines went in initially. I think that was April '04. And then they pulled back. They tried to do negotiations. They let the summer pass. And then they had to go back in October 2004, October, November. A number of Marines died. I mean, wounded, dead, because having civilians in the battle space will change your war footing. Now, I can talk about it from both sides. I was an Army intel officer, and I was at this small base up in northern Baghdad. And these contractors would just come in and they'd grab food and they'd take off. And I'd say, why aren't those guys telling us what they're doing or where they're going? I didn't expect these guys. What the heck is happening? But as a contractor, that was the beauty of it. I didn't have to tell you. I didn't have to do anything. And there's a number of incidents where we would drive up on US military convoys and they would, point their weapons at us. So what it does is it obscures the battlefield between who is a civilian and who is a military member. And then how do you act and react when those two things cross? And we're getting closer and closer to them crossing, where we're going to keep using these proxies, these PMCs, until something happens, right?
Yeah.
We got them in DRC, we got them in, I mean, you name it. Bulgaria has a big contracting firm in DRC right now, doing drone operations. So I think it's advantageous to continue to use these. That's why you see more countries doing it. But at the same time, when something bad happens, that's when people are going to have to look in the mirror and say, holy crap, we don't have any policy or any legality around this thing.
So, what does Israel get out of this? Why would they prefer to have American contractors, private contractors, manning the perimeter around these distribution sites? Why don't they just use their own military? What's in it for them to have us invested in this way?
I mean, definitely arm's length. That's the first thing. The second thing is that Israel does not trust the UN. So this is my counter argument to every argument that I've made up to this point. We have Haiti, we have contractors in Haiti, we have contractors in Gaza. And when you look at the billions and billions of dollars over the last 2, 3, 4 decades that we have poured into these places, nothing has made them stable. Nothing has turned them into these bastions of democracy, as we keep trying to, figure out. So from an Israeli standpoint, from a US standpoint, why are you going to keep using the UN and all these other NGOs that are essentially doing the same thing, right? USAID didn't have their people out there handing out food in Gaza. They use subcontractors. That's how it works. And you have seen corruption in the UN, and you have seen that the UN will take the amount of aid and say, hey, we already know that X amount is going to go to Hamas. Let's give that to them so we can feed the people. So they're trying to flip the paradigm on it using, corporate speak. They're trying to figure out, how can we do this more efficiently, get it directly to the people on the ground, because we know that it hasn't been working for the last couple of decades. Now, the problem is, as soon as we drop it off, UG Solutions takes off, and there's nothing stopping from Hamas going in and taking this aid from the individuals that go and gather it. And there's 1,000 videos of this on X where you're seeing it. So I don't know that it's any better, but I don't know that it's any worse than what we saw the UN doing. So why not try something new, right? I think you and I had a debate where I said, I don't care if I get my pizza from Pizza Hut delivery or if I get it from DoorDash. It doesn't matter to me if I'm getting my pizza. And I do think that Israel is trying to keep their hands off it, so that they're saying, we're not taking sides. We only care about the people at the bottom. Whether that's accurate or not, who the heck knows?
I would probably disagree with that. And the one caveat I would make is I don't want this to be made out to be whether Hamas is taking aid or not. But I think if the Israeli military was securing the aid inside, all those years in which they were, the checkpoints, they had the checkpoints closed down, or they said that the food had been looted. There was never an operation in which they were securing the aid that was getting through. The UN, like you pointed out, had to hire contractors to bring it in. I'm wondering if they put as much effort into securing the aid distribution points all the way up into this point, working with the UN and working with UNRWA and some of these other NGOs, that maybe the food would have gotten to where it could go. But I don't want to debate that. I do want to say, I mean, if people are dying And that's the takeaway that the world community is getting, is that people are getting shot and increasingly desperate for the food. And it looks like some Hunger Games situation where everybody has to follow the rules. And if they step over a line, they get shot at, no warning shots. We're getting all these reports. I mean, that can't help anybody's cause, I would mean, at the end of the day. And it kind of makes the mission a little suspect about what Israelis are really trying to do there. Um,
I,
all
I
that,
I don't think the Israelis have a pure heart in this. Let's be honest
yeah,
here. Like Israel and the Palestinians have hated each other for thousands of years. Tomorrow is not going to change if we get flour and grain in these places. I think
right,
Israeli is doing this to try to placate the international community so that
yeah,
they can continue to do whatever it is that they're doing. They just went into
right,
another place in Gaza, what, like 2, 3 days ago. 88% of it is Israeli controlled. This is putting some icing on top of the turd that is the
yes,
conflict that they're actually going through right now.
yeah. I totally agree with you. So all that said, I mean, putting Americans in there and all of that fraught stew
Follow the
cauldron,
money.
whatever you want to call it. I just don't. We'll go back to our original premise. This can't be good for the contractors or for the United States being connected, however loosely connected to it.
Yeah, and so I think what's also kind of being missed in this is you have your security part, your UG solutions, that's getting all the press right now. What you don't see is safe reach solutions is the ones that are actually driving the aid. So UG protects the
Okay.
convoy. They protect kind of like the perimeter while the aid is being distributed. And then you have safe reach solutions that is hiring people to drive this aid in, and they're hiring third party nationals, or TCNs, what we used to call them, third
Okay.
party nationals. And those guys are being targeted by Hamas. Uh, and there's probably a heck of a lot more of those guys that are dying than anybody is reporting on.
Hmm.
And I just don't think there's a good solution here. I wish I could sit here and say I had a panacea and we have the ability to do this or that or the other. We tried to drop aid in Gaza, and then a couple of people went out there with their arms raised and ended up having the pallets fall on them. They died. There is no good solution in this. So at least they're trying something different, but I don't think overall you're going to get any better results out of this thing. But if you follow
No.
the money, people are going to get rich off of it.
Right. Well, my last question is, I mean, is this, this isn't just my phraseology, but is this the Wagnerization or the Wagnerization of American private military contracting, referring to Russia's use of the Wagner organization to fight its wars in Syria and Ukraine and now all over Africa? I mean, have we kind of taken a page out of their book and say, we promise not to put any boots on the ground, but we really do want to pursue military solutions with other countries, and this is the way to do it. Do you fear that we are going in that direction for like this in a new era of warfare?
So this is worse than Wagner. It is. And I don't say that because I think that the people on the ground are worse than Wagner that was, recruiting criminals to be in their military. But at least Wagner has the ability to say, I work at the behest of the Russian government.
Right.
Right. So they get to do what I did with Blackwater, is they get to say, oh, I was working for the government. I'm not a mercenary. It makes me feel good and I get to sleep better at night. The people that are working for UG Solutions do not have that cover. And the problem with it is that we continue to sit there and say we're not mercenaries, and yet we're starting to see these contracts where it's going through another country or another corporation or something, and it is 100% mercenary work. So I think it's worse than Wagner. The difference is that Wagner is like a military unit. They can go out there, they can take land, they can hold land. They have like all the equipment that
Yeah.
the U.S. that the military has. I say we We say we are defensive as private military contractors. We
Mhm.
are only on the defensive, and we're setting up security and we're making sure that things are secure. But you can't drive a vehicle from Israel into Gaza or from the green zone in Baghdad out into the red zone and say you're not doing some kind of an offensive operation. And I think that the scary part about this is that they are taking all those ideals of, hey, we're only defensive and we work for a government, so we're okay, and they're throwing that right out the window, and it's just straight mercenary work. So how is this going to change? I mean, I think that the CCP has been doing this similarly with Frontier Services Group, which
Mhm.
was Eric Prince's baby after he got booted out of the U.S. contracts. I think everybody's just going to keep doing this to see how far it can go until you end up having two proxies that are fighting alongside two enemies. And you're kind of seeing that with the
Ooh,
Russia-Ukraine
yeah.
thing, right? Like we have trainers in the Ukraine on one side, and then on the other side you have Russians and their mercenaries on their side, and they're going at it. And sooner or later, it's going to turn into a big thing.
Yeah. I'm afraid you're right about that, and, I guess, we'll have to watch, and instinctively, I feel that they're getting a pass with this current situation, Israel, Gaza, because the media not very interested, and there's all these political dimensions about supporting Israel, and so I just don't feel there's as much scrutiny on what's happening there until, as you say, maybe something terrible happens, which I hope doesn't. And then that might cause a little bit of a furor and pressure on the American government to own up to what's going on there. But I guess we'll wait and see. I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking about this. And I hope you'll come back because I get the sense that you can talk about a lot of things that maybe other former military or private contractors are comfortable with, and I really appreciate your candor.
Oh no, it's absolutely my pleasure. I do want to warn anybody that if you buy my book, this is not like an educated analytics book. All right. This is not Morgan that went to Tufts University. This is 23-year-old Morgan working for Blackwater, warts and all. So I've had a few people that are like, wow, I heard you speak so eloquently on something. And then they read my book and they're like, oh my God, who's that guy? So um,
Well, we need more of that, and particularly from the era of the Iraq War, because I feel like now that there's been 20, 25 years put between the events, there are lapses, and people have either dismissed that as just or that's a period of overall U.S. foreign policy failure, or they romanticize certain aspects, and I think the entire chapter of the role of private military contractors has been virtually lost if it wasn't for people like you with your memoirs and talking about this and relating it to what's happening today. I feel like all that knowledge would go down a black hole. We have a whole generation of younger people who are not, they don't know what kind of role the private contracting industry played in keeping that war going, particularly in Afghanistan for 20 years. I think without the security contractors, but also all the other contractors that fed and clothed and built everything for the U.S. military, we probably wouldn't have had that protracted war.
Oh, I agree. I think it at the end of the day, I was in Iraq in '09 and 10, and we had more private military contractors over there than soldiers. It was like 110,000 private military contractors with somewhere around like 60,000 soldiers. So, I mean, it's a self-licking ice cream cone.
Yeah.
And when you start putting people that are volunteering to go over there, right, like me, and you put them in harm's way, people are like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. It's still a big deal. Lives are being
Yep.
lost. And
Absolutely.
we I hope it doesn't repeat itself, but God, I'm watching it. Like I'm watching the job boards on contracting just explode right now with all the
Oh
crazy
my
stuff.
goodness.
So
Oh. Okay. Well, thank you, Morgan, for coming on Trip the Beltway. Fantastic. And we will talk with you again, I hope.
thanks, Kelly. I'll come back anytime.